Welcome to this short lecture on the declining rate of profit. The declining rate of profit is one of the most powerful theories in all of economics. It's been around for a long time, and it's basically explaining why over time the return on any investment will start to fall and how people may and may not be able to do something about it. What is slightly different about this lecture is I'm not looking at it in the general and historical image of the investment in machinery or things. I'm looking for application to management theories, to consultancies, to the growth of the business Bible and its provisioning such of things as business biographies, etc. And I think it's quite important to look at it. And firstly, I think you should address what exactly the theory is and what the model is. Okay, so what is the declining rate of profit? Well, initial concept came from Adam Smith. Many of these, of course, it's quite common when we look at economic theories, that the roots of them in some way were back at Adam Smith, the founder of capitalism, or the father of capitalism as he's known. Uh, And in fact, many people are quite surprised because some people believe that some of these theories came later on, as we see if we look at a number of things like surplus value, etc. To actually see that Adam Smith was originally the one that was looking into these areas, same the labour theory of value, in fact. So Adam Smith was first came up with the idea and noted, really empirically, just noted that actually over time profit rates declined. He didn't actually bring up a particular argument for or against it. He simply said it was what it was. He had no great explanation. Other people then moved on to develop that idea. First, David Ricardo, again, a common name we see in early economics, starting to look at what exactly was causing this and starting to theorize models. But its present form, the way we see it today, is developed by Karl Marx. And he knew it as the tendency of the rate of profit to fall because good old Marx was nothing if not verbose. And having a short, snappy title was really just not his style. And to put simply, the point about this theory is that the more you invest in technology, the greater the range of markets needed in order to get a return, and the smaller your return will be. The idea was that you pump money into technology, you start to make a profit, then over time that profit starts to fall, and therefore you need to look at a number of ways in which you can reboost technology. One of the obvious ways to do that is to invest in more technology. But this, of course, can boost your market for a while, but it course then leads to further declines. Goes on and on. There are other ways, of course, such as unemployment, calling on the reserve army of labour, pushing down wages, etc. But they're the ones we're going to really do now. We're just looking really at the idea that the rate of profit declines and why that's important for us doing that. Okay. One thing that's problematic about this, though, is you might think, oh, well, why don't you just stop investing? Well, the problem is capitalism is a system of competition, and although you may feel that if you stop investing, then over time your rate of profit will not fall. In fact, the rate of profit in the market will continue to fall because others will invest. The point is, people are trying to get ahead of the game and have a short period in which they make extensive extra profits, but over time that will definitely start to fall away, and therefore you may decide, I'm not going to get into that rat race. But if you don't get into that rat race, then effectively you're simply denying yourself any share of the larger profits, and you'll simply be hit by it harder. Eventually, of course, if you can keep your afloat, companies will go bust, ideas will go bust, you'll be able to buy up cheap capital, maybe recruit cheap labour that's been released back onto the market, and by doing so you can then have it again, you can start the battle all over again, trying to boost your rate of profit. And what we all see in this, of course, is what people often refer to as flogging the assets, where people try and overuse their machines, overuse their labour, overuse their vehicles, etc., trying to push them to sweat the assets, flog the assets. These are names that come along there. I've just spoke about this again, so that, and in fact, Marx himself recognised that the dividend payment was not the only part of the profit rate. And as we know today, that as we've seen the more great complexities of capitalism, there are a number of ways in which capitalists can extract profits or surplus value, and these are a great variety of ways to do this, and therefore we've been looking at, when we look at the sort of different ways that capitalism works, the different ownership theories, etc., we can start to see that, see how important it is. It's also nice to note that actually one way that investors can counteract this, as opposed to that sort of burlesque idea of investing and returning investment and being speculators, and actually Marx noticed this was already happening back in the 1860s, was to swap share ownership, to sell the shares you had, buy new shares in new companies, and then maybe you could return to the companies that you had been investing before once they had overcome the initial problem of the decline rate of profit. So we already start to see how this sort of speculation in the markets can start to influence and destroy and damage the whole concept. So, having looked at what this declining rate of profit is, how can we apply it to management theories? Well, I think it's important to recognise that In Marx's day, technology was mostly machinery. We know that Marx himself had identified ways in which financialization could impact on the declining rate of profit, but mostly the simplistic way of looking at it is that actually is about buying machines, sporting equipment, and building that sort of thing up. And I want to sort of look a bit beyond that and say, actually, these days, however, we tend to look at more in-depth consideration of what is technology. And for technology, as we identify some three components. Basically, we see technology as knowledge. That is, if you know something, if you understand something, if you can use that in a way for your business, then that is knowledge and is a technological investment, technological development you can use to build profit. And if you just look at, we even had whole industries known as knowledge industries these days. So it's not that controversial to think of technology as a form of knowledge and knowledge as a form of technology. We also think of it as artifact, which is the more classic one. No, we don't put artifact first. There's a reason we put it this order. Knowledge, use knowledge to develop artifacts, use knowledge to develop machinery, develop to, whether that be a computer or a spinning jenny or a different type of desk or anything like that, type of chair. You use that knowledge to develop them. So it's, an artifact actually comes second in most of these definitions, which is the physical products that we think of as being technology. And then we finally have process, which is the third one, which is the way you bring knowledge and your machinery and your equipment together to create processes. So in fact, you have all three of these that come together. And in many ways, management theories are a way of using knowledge about present technology and about the way we can do things these days and creating processes. So it's very important that we can apply this to management theories and we understand that the decline rate of profit, which is an iron law of economics that affects so many things, is very, very fundamentally applicable to management theories. So how does it actually work we apply it to management theories? Well, for that, we're going to use a well-known tool in marketing, operations and product development of the product life cycle. And the idea of the product life cycle, of course, is simply that the products go through a period of innovation, introduction, development, maturity and decline. And obviously companies make most of their money actually around the time of maturity, as mostly among development and introduction. These are kind of growth. These are periods when actually you have to spend a lot of money on marketing, you have to spend a lot of money on develop them, and you don't really have the product. So actually, it's in maturity that you make most of your money. And this is how we see this as very relevant to the idea of management theories. So how does this therefore apply to the product life cycle? Well, let's look at life cycle for a management theory. You have a new idea and you introduce it. It's an expensive time, but most of these will be a bespoke idea. Perhaps you've called it to consultancy at a large company. Perhaps you're looking at a new concept, some new ideas, something being brought new to market, and you're developing theories around it. And it's bespoke, and it's new, and it's fresh, and you're looking for it as a solution. But at this time, you're probably using, if you're a management consultant, you're probably using your best people, your most expensive people, and looking at ideas anew. And it will probably actually take you quite a lot of money to develop it, and you won't necessarily be able to reclaim all that money on the initial company, who might not be able to. They'll think that otherwise your cost might be too high. So you therefore need to use it. And in this period of time, you'll probably want to keep ownership of it. So in the growth period, it will generally be used by the developers only. And for this reason, many places, such as Boston Consulting Group, for instance, copyright or patent technology in their process and their ideas. And actually, we still this the same. Even with the Open University, soft systems methodology was actually a system that was originally copyrighted by the Open University. So you have these sort of developments as time go on, and people use it by developers only. And this is not the period they're making a lot of money, because they are starting to get a lot more market share, but they are actually having to use it within a restricted cycle. But when you hit the phase of maturity, and this is the time when actually you still have control of it, you may start to come out in common textbooks. You'll see they introduce it to new theories, trying to get new, perhaps new students, academics, develop the use of this theory. And this maturity is when they probably make most of their money, and the ideas are out there being used, and people will be buying up there. This is the time you actually hear about them using for instance, the General Electric solution is a classic one you hear about that, and you'll see ideas coming forward, the solutions that have been developed for one company and being spread out wide across them. And then finally, the ideas will fall into decline, just as they would with any other management theory. And this is the time when you may make some money off it. It's an airport popular business book. We also refer this to kind of management bullshit period, when phrases become overused and become the kind of, you hear them all the time, and people stop taking them seriously, etc. But of course, as in most product life cycles, actually around the time of maturity, you may look for a time to develop it and make it bigger, what we call a product extension. And in this case, a product extension can mean it's been extended to elsewhere, areas such as, for instance, the public sector. But it's still after the bullshit period to a certain extent, the BS period. But we're looking at where it be used elsewhere. It might be used in the public sector, it might be used in education, etc. Note these lines we're talking about here are about market demand. And market demand is obviously a major element of this, and this is where we're trying to look to develop and get our ideas out there. But what we're really looking for, of course, is profit. The profit line of this period is what you see here. So profits are actually growing all the way through the period of new idea, growth period, maturity, constant use, common textbook, etc. And then into market demand, and then they fall into decline. So you're actually hoping an extension to repeat this model again when you actually start to boost some more profit on top of that. So it's an important issue when you're trying to move forward. So that's what we're saying. Actually, if you treat ideas as technology, you can actually see how they extend over time and how they become part of a management theory, a management model, and that over time they may decline and become less important to you. Okay, so let's get some conclusions from this. So what we're going to say, well, firstly, as the value of theories fall, we'll often see extensions of redevelopments and attempts to recopyright them. So swap become toes, for example, and this is one way which people are trying to look at that. So we're seeing them over time. They're going from extending from being a bespoke idea to being a general idea to becoming like a throwaway idea that's actually involved in a business, in business books, etc. And might be more common. They might try and extend that to actually get a period of brief special use of sole use as well by recopyrighting the new ideas and moving them into some sort of concept, for instance, like the new public sector, new ideas of that. And so we're getting to see them working out there. And so they're looking for these new markets, looking for the public sector, universities, etc. And often these are very, very inappropriate, and people look at these ideas and they say do that. And that is because they were originally built for anything else, and they haven't made a huge amount of effort. So they've been very poorly adapted doing this. So I think this is where we see some of the problems, and this is where I see sometimes when you want to look at the theories and the management theories, you should take this into account when looking at it. Really put that adapted. As a brief aside, however, I'd just like to say one thing. I often talk about the need for synthesis, and academia often asks you to synthesize. And I think what we can see here is if you look at the next thing, simply as a lesson in synthesis, we can see how you can combine the decline rate of profit with the product life cycle as we've done here, and that is what we mean by synthesis. Especially if you can throw in examples, etc., you can build up a much bigger and better model for that. Okay, well, thank you for watching. Hope you found this useful.